to you from the Message version. I think it speaks to it a little better. Jesus realized that the Pharisees were keeping count of the baptisms that he and John performed, although his disciples, not Jesus, did the actual baptizing. They had posted a score that Jesus was ahead, turning him and John into rivals in the eyes of people. So Jesus left the Judean countryside and went back to Galilee. To get there, he had to pass through Samaria. He came into Sychar, a Samaritan village that bordered the field Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was still there. Jesus, worn out by the trip, sat down at the well. It was noon. A woman, a Samaritan, came to draw water. Jesus said, "Would you give me a drink of water?" His disciples had gone to the village to buy food for lunch. The Samaritan woman, taken aback, asked, "How come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" Jews in those days couldn't be caught dead talking to Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the generosity of God and who I am, you would be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh, living water." The woman said, "Sir, you don't even have a bucket to draw with, and this well is deep. So how are you going to get this living water? Are you a better man than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well and drank from it? He and his sons and livestock, and passed it down to us." Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again. Anyone who drinks the water I give will never thirst, not ever. The water I give will be an artesian spring within, gushing fountains of endless life." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't ever get thirsty, won't ever have to come back to this well again." He said, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she said. "That's nicely put. I have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now isn't even your husband. You spoke the truth there, sure enough." "Oh, so you're a prophet. Well, tell me this. Our ancestors worshipped God at this mountain, but you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place for worship, right?" "Believe me, woman, the time is coming when you Samaritans will worship the Father neither here at this mountain nor there in Jerusalem. You worship guessing in the dark. We Jews worship in the clear light of day. God's way of salvation is made available through the Jews, but the time is coming, it has in fact already come, when what you're called will not matter, and where you go to worship will not matter. It's who you are, and the way you live that count before God. Your worship must engage your spirit in the pursuit of truth. That's the kind of people that God is out looking for, those who are simply and honestly themselves before him in their worship. God is sheer being itself, spirit. Those who worship him must do it out of their very being, their spirits, their true selves, in adoration." The woman said, "I don't know about that. I do know that the Messiah is coming. When he arrives, we'll get the whole story." "I am he," said Jesus. "You don't have to wait any longer or look any further." Just then his disciples came back and they were shocked. They couldn't believe he was talking with that kind of a woman. No one said that they were all thinking, but their faces showed it. The woman took the hint and left. In her confusion, she left her water pot. Back in the village, she told the people, "Come see a man who knew all about the things I did. He knows me inside and out. You think this could be the Messiah?" And they went out to see for themselves. Chimamanda Adichie gave a recent TED Talk where she talked about the danger of a single story. That every story and every person is multifaceted with multiple stories, but sometimes we lock in on one, something that we hear about that person and we keep it in our minds, and that becomes how we identify that person. So she talked about when she was living in Nigeria and she was growing up. Her father was a professor and her mom an administrator at the local university. And they hired this boy, Fide, to work in the house. And Mom would always tell her that Fide's family was very poor. They had nothing. And so every time she would leave some food on her plate, she'd say, "What's the matter with you? People like Fide's family are starving to death, and here you are leaving food on your plate." And so she got this idea of how dirt poor and how pathetic that this family was. Until she went to visit them at their house one day and saw some of the stuff that the brother was making in the family, and saw the joy that they had and how happy they were just with simple things. It wasn't so much that they were poor, they were just content with simplicity. And then when she came to America as a Nigerian, and all of the thoughts that Americans had about somebody coming from Africa, and when they asked her, "Why do you speak English so well?" She says, "English is our national language." "Hey, can you play us some of your tribal music?" She whipped out a Mariah Carey CD. All of these stories. And sometimes this focus on one single story can result in just plain ignorance. But other times, it can be downright dangerous. Consider Emmett. In 1955, Emmett was 14 years old. He'd been born here in Chicago, and he wanted to go down to the Mississippi Delta, where his mom had come from. He wanted to learn what things were like down there. She said, "Okay, all right, you can go with my brothers and go down and see what things are like down south, but I want to warn you, things are not the same down there as they are out here. Colored folks like us get lynched. We get killed and nobody does anything about it. Keep your mouth shut. If a white person tells you to do something, you say, 'Yes, sir,' and you do it. Swallow your pride and figure out how things are, because it's very different down there." And so when Emmett went down there to visit his family, he and some of his cousins and friends were playing, and they went to this general store owned by a husband and wife, and when he was there, it was purported that he whistled at the white woman working behind the counter who owned the store, and that he told her, "Hey, baby, I've had lots of white women. Don't worry about it. Come on. Give me a try." His mama warned him. Mama warned him, don't go mouthing off. Especially to white people. Things are just not the same down there. And the poor kid, he learned his lesson. When the husband came home from his trip to Texas and they were hauling some shrimp, he came and went to his uncle's house and asked, "Is that boy who was whistling at my wife living here?" So they kidnapped him, took him away, beat the tar out of him, mutilated him, shot him, and threw his body in the Tallahatchie River. I want to feel sorry for him, but gosh darn it, he was warned. Don't do those things or something bad's going to happen. And that's what happened. That's his story. But that's a single story. See, the rest of the story is that Emmett stuttered. And in order to pronounce B's and P's, he'd whistle beforehand to get his mouth right so he could say them. And the fact that the police had covered things up, that the local sheriff admitted that what happened was wrong, but yet, for some reason, he turned around and said, "You know, that body in the river, it's so mutilated, you can't even tell who it is. That's probably not even Emmett. That's probably planted there by the NAACP, so I'm sure Emmett went back home to Chicago. So there's nothing to charge these folks with." Well, they were charged. They did go to court. And when the two witnesses who saw what happened, the sheriff took them and put them in jail during the trial so they couldn't testify. After the court case was over, and of course they were acquitted, because of double jeopardy, right? You can't be tried twice for the same crime, even if you're acquitted. They went in a national magazine and said, "Yep, we did it. He deserved it. Let this be a lesson to those colored folks," and he didn't say it that nicely. "You don't mess with white women." They admitted it. Some 35 years later, the wife came out and admitted to a national TV station that her husband used to beat her, and that she just always went with whatever he said, and that Emmett never said those things to her. That's another part of the story. The rest of the story. His mom wanted everybody to realize what was happening, and so she had his body brought back to Chicago, and she had an open casket funeral. That poor boy's mangled and disgusting body. but she wanted people to see. And magazines started, and newspapers were carrying the picture of this boy's body, and that led to outrage, both in the parts of the African American community and in the parts of the white community that felt that this kind of thing was just wrong. And in there was built that energy that fueled the civil rights movement. Right? It wasn't long after that the Montgomery bus boycott happened, and all these things that set it in motion because of these stories that were coming out. That there was danger in just saying one single story. And Jesus knew that. Jesus knew that because when he was at this well and he finds this woman there at noontime, nobody in their right mind went to the well at noon. People went early in the morning and then after evening when the sun was down because it was too hot. She was there for a reason, because people wouldn't talk to her. People didn't want to see her. They ousted her. Why? What had she done? Well, Jesus says, well, you had 5 husbands and you're with this dude now and he ain't your husband. I don't know what kind of business you're up to, but it's not good. But Jesus didn't say it that simply, did he? And afterwards she said, here is a man who knew everything I had done. A man who saw into my soul and knew who I really am. Somebody that those women who had come to the well in the morning and the evening didn't want to bother to see. Right? They'd gossip about her. They'd say things about her. But what was the rest of the story? Well, in Jewish law, it said if your husband dies, you got to marry the brother. If he dies, you got to marry the other brother. What if all of her husbands died and she had to, by law, marry the brothers? What if it was something else? Something that we can't even conceive? What if she wasn't just marrying all these men? What if she was lonely? What if her husbands were rotten and they'd leave her, or they beat her, or who knows what? We don't know, but there's not one single story about this woman. There are many, and Jesus realized that. And in seeing into her, to who she really was, to seeing that she was thirsty for something more than water, he fed her soul, and then she went out to the women who had cast her out and said, come see a man who knows everything about me. It piqued their interest. They wanted to see what was up with this guy, and so they came. And the passage would go on to say that they believed when they heard her story, her testimony, but they believed more so when they went and they talked to him. And each and every one of them. Imagine how their eyes were opened about this woman when Jesus peered into their souls and said, I know you. Imagine how enlightened they were. Imagine how they were awakened to saying, why have we gone around judging this woman when we haven't bothered to sit and hear her story? Now there's a couple of things in there for us. We see that Jesus is interacting. Jesus sees everything in relationship. Jesus sees that in speaking with these people and hearing their story, he validates them as human beings, as people made in the image of God. He gives them the importance due because he listens. He gives them living water, and sometimes it's just as simple as listening. And so as all these women are awakened, and they come to realize and they're given life, and they drink of this water, we think of this interconnectedness that we all have with one another, right? And I was listening to a podcast yesterday or the day before, and I just thought, wow, everything really is interconnected. You look at these walls, you look at a stone on the ground, you look at a plant, you look at the soil, this building. Everything exists because of its relationship to something else. The relationship of a hammer hitting a nail. The way that a stone is formed over millions of years. And then the way it's eroded and polished and reacting to water and other elements and things. Right? Space. Atoms. Gravity, right? Gravity doesn't exist in and of itself. Things exert force on one another. It's relationship. And we are in relationship. Each and every one of us in relationship to each other, in relationship with other people, and that's what Jesus teaches us. That all of us are interconnected, all of us are interrelated, and in our relationships, we leave impressions that we can't even imagine. As we interact with one another, we're doing something that we may not even be cognizant of. We're forming each other. We're forming ourselves. It's kind of like Brandyn sang, you'll hear in the song that you guys have heard before. All of these stories don't mean anything without someone to tell them to. Listening, drinking of the water. And then there's that quote in Lemony Snicket. For somebody who feels like they've been wronged, it's like being thirsty and telling them they're not. Don't tell somebody they're not thirsty. Sit down with them. Have a drink.